Welcome everyone to ComACL Carey's 2024 OSHA Employment Webinar Series. Today we are presenting on the intersection between artificial intelligence and employment and OSHA law. And I am joined today by several of my colleagues here at CMC. My name is Rachel Kahn. I'm a partner and chair of ComACL's California practice. My practice primarily focuses on OSHA compliance and litigation, inspections, audits, investigations, enforcement, rulemaking, and I joined CMC as from Nixon Peabody, where I was the head of their national OSHA practice. In addition, I am also joined by my colleague, Andrea Chavez, who's a senior counsel in our Los Angeles office, and she focuses on Cal OSHA, labor law, and California employment law and advice and counseling. So representing employers in everything Cal OSHA related, as well as discrimination, wrongful termination, PAGA class actions, and all sorts of rulemaking and compliance. I'm also joined by Darius Rohani Shukla, who is from our DC office, and he advises on AI, privacy, data security issues across all domains in state privacy laws, HIPAA, employment-specific privacy matters, also supports in occupational safety and health issues, and all variety of labor and employment litigation and compliance. And finally, we're also rounding out by being joined by Samuel Rose, who is also in our Los Angeles office with Andrea. And similarly, he represents employers in all varieties of Cal OSHA issues and with developing workplace safety and health programs and a variety of employment issues, including wage and hour and wrongful termination claims. So we have a full agenda for you today. We're going to start with the overview of AI, examples on how it is used in the workplace, how it can be used to promote workplace safety, the regulatory framework, employment and OSHA considerations, and then work through developing an AI strategy for your company. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Darius to start us off.
Good afternoon, stroke. Good morning, everyone. Nice to meet you. My name is Darius Rohani Shukla. And to start this off, right, the spirit of this webinar is when we talk about AI and its implications across employment and OSHA regulations. But to start with, I thought it'd be helpful to just give a brief overview of AI, what it means, and what really we're talking about today. Because AI itself, it'd be lovely if it was like a single program that we could easily apply and regulate and understand for our different workplaces, but it's not. In actuality, it's this quite broad, evolving field of computer science. The aim being to really replicate human-like intelligence in machines. The idea is, you're giving systems this idea to see, understand, and make decisions much like humans, us, do. So AI itself isn't this single tool. I think probably a more effective way of looking at it is as a toolkit. So within that, there are these subsets of machine learning, where systems learn from data, natural language processing for understanding language, and robotics for physical tasks. So each of these areas are, contributing to a piece of the bigger picture of what AI can accomplish. One of the reasons that AI specifically is so transformative is its versatility. It can be used in a wide variety of industries, be finance, healthcare, transportation, and as a result, it's going to impact a wide variety of industries. And so it's really important that it's considered carefully and understood so that you can understand sort of like the regulatory implications and how you can issue spot for how it might be impacting your business. So moving on to the next slide, a brief, two of the phrases you might hear about when you hear about AI are kind of machine learning and deep learning. Machine learning is the core part of AI, right? It's data-driven learning. The idea is the system's going to learn from data without being explicitly programmed. It's like teaching a computer by example rather than instruction. And then the subset of that, the more frightening version of AI is deep learning, right? This idea that deep learning is taking machine learning a step further, using this idea of a neural network modeled after, the human brain, where a computer can handle these vast amounts of data, thinking about, text, images, videos, and in doing, start to recognize complex patterns on their own, much like we do. So deep learning is where you're seeing like these major advancements in autonomous vehicles, real-time translation, and this type of analysis that wasn't really possible ever before deep learning itself was invented. Then moving on to the last slide, kind of our overview of AI. I'm just going to kind of another overview of like how AI itself works. The idea of AI is it's going to start with this input, right? It's going to be data, sensors, images, and the data is the foundation of what the AI will learn from. The AI will then process this data using algorithms to detect patterns. Machine learning models are going to find relationships in the data, while deep learning models are going to like that one step deeper, breaking down complex data like speech, like images. And as the AI will learn from its patterns, it fine-tunes its model. It improves its understanding to, make better predictions, whether it's recognizing, objects and photos or anticipating user needs. And then finally, we arrive at the output, right? It's going to be this action, this movement, this text, a recommendation, a classification response. And the outputs itself will improve kind of over time as the system learns from its interactions. So when you're thinking about AI, what you want to think about is kind of the key message is AI is going to input data that usually the business will provide, analyze these patterns and produce outputs, becoming, more accurate and more effective as it learns and the more data it's provided. So that's a brief overview of AI. Now we can move to the next slide and just a few examples of how you can issue spot where AI might be used in the workplace.
Thanks, Darius. So that was a really good broad explanation of what AI is. And now we'll get into some examples of how AI is used both in employment context and in workplace safety. So to start out with employment, one of the big ways we've seen AI develop in the employment context is using it in recruitment. AI is really good at screening documents and summarizing the content of those documents, and then using that output of what it determines the document says to make certain types of decisions. So in the recruitment context, the software learns which candidates are typically successful based on their performance, tenure, turnover rates, or various other employment or personal characteristics. And then it learns what existing employees' experience, skills, and other qualities are, and applies that knowledge to new applicants. And it can do that to rank, grade, or shortlist which applicants might be the most advantageous to an employer. So we've seen all types of third-party job board sites implementing AI. We've seen employers implementing it directly to help evaluate and sort applicants. And so that's one of the big areas that we've seen AI start to take off in the employment context. Another area that we're starting to see and anticipate will continue to grow is the use of AI in drafting various written materials that would ordinarily be done by human resources. So that could include job descriptions, performance reviews, marketing materials, safety policies. And while these can often be efficient ways of using AI in that they cut down the amount of time and resources that someone has to spend on drafting them, you also want to, of course, be extremely careful that what the AI is drafting for you is reviewed by someone who knows about compliance and knows the regulations and laws that are applicable to your operations, because oftentimes the AI isn't able to analyze all those different requirements and could produce an output that is not in compliance with the laws or regulations in your jurisdiction. So we anticipate that this will continue to evolve and could potentially one day become an effective way of drafting written materials. But for now, it's a good start as long as you have someone confirming that the AI is producing a compliant output. Another way we've seen AI being used is through managing employee performance. This really took off in 2020 when COVID hit and a lot of employees were working from home. A lot of companies were implementing tools that could track employees' use of their keyboards or monitor whether they're paying attention to their computer screen, monitor what websites or applications they're using, track how long they spend on various tasks. A lot of algorithms are capable of identifying employees spending too much time on a task and analyzing their performance in whether a task is taking too long and those resources are being used in an inefficient way, or whether an employee is using a reasonable amount of time and then the employer can use that information to analyze an employee's performance. There are a lot of algorithms that can use those metrics and either directly discipline the employee itself, or it can provide a recommendation to the employer through HR or various other departments, supervisors, about whether an employee should be disciplined or whether that employee isn't meeting performance expectations. And so a lot of this just depends on the type of algorithm that you're using, whether that process is done automatically, which might be a risky choice for an employer to make, or whether it just provides a recommendation and flags certain types of performance for an HR department to then analyze more thoroughly and then provide disciplinary action if necessary. AI is also could potentially be used to manage employee compensation. Machine learning AI can help companies use compensation analytics to identify their employee challenges and predict trends. Oftentimes, employers can use AI to evaluate their current compensation structure and see how it's being implemented across a variety of demographics to ensure that their pay policies aren't creating disparate discrimination impacts. And it could also be used to help close pay gaps amongst different education, experience, certifications, or a variety of other factors. So because AI is able to gather so much data and produce certain types of reports or analysis of that data, employers can use that to evaluate their pay structure and ensure that they don't have any discriminatory practices. And of course, not always, most 99% of the time, it's not a purposeful discriminatory impact, but it's a disparate one. It's not intended, but it's one that ends up happening unbeknownst to the employer. And so the AI can help track that and ensure that those types of practices are caught. And lastly, a lot of employers could use AI to shape employee career paths. One of the ways that we think this could be beneficial is that it could use current employees' information, demographics, data, and experience to suggest job openings or career paths within the organization. Or it could provide recommendations for learning and training to employees. One of the benefits of this could be that rather than going outside the organization to hire and recruit new employees, it could provide employers the opportunity to use current employees in areas where they wouldn't ordinarily be used because it's either outside of their department or outside of their team. And so it cuts down on those costs and resources that it takes to recruit and hire a new employee. And it also has the benefit of, giving employees exposure to new areas of your operation or your company where they ordinarily wouldn't get that experience. So it kind of has a cost, it has a benefit on both sides. And so that's another area where we anticipate AI could be used in the future. So with that, I'll turn it over to Andrea to talk about how AI could be used in workplace safety.
Thanks, Sam. Okay, so from a health and safety perspective, you have a lot of employers using AI in a lot of different interesting ways. Employers are using AI for real-time hazard detection. They essentially use cameras with AI algorithms to surveil work sites and identify safety risks such as a lack of PPE, spills, equipment malfunctions, or other unsafe practices all in real time. And this is really helpful because the systems quickly detect these hazards and automatically alert management about them. all leading to a safer environment. But you always want to double check the AI's, I guess, output, especially if you're going to use this information for, let's say, corrective actions. For example, with facial recognition, studies have shown that people with, darker skin tones are more likely to be misidentified by AI and facial recognition, which is an issue that has the potential to lead to discrimination claims from employees. So similarly, employers are using AI to monitor employee behavior. So essentially tracking and analyzing employee activities and movements like lifting techniques or repetitive motions to ensure compliance with safety protocols. And then although it may not fit exactly into AI, I wanted to bring up the fact that more and more employers are using environmental sensors and biosensors to measure employee exposure levels. And monitoring employees like this also raises many legal considerations of, for example, privacy, record keeping, and a lot of other things that we're going to talk about in a second. And the advantage of a lot of this AI is that the analysis is almost instantaneous and the alerts to management about issues are automatic. So these are just a few ways that AI is very helpful in promoting safe workplaces. So AI-driven predictive analytics is also allowing employees or companies to identify hazards before they occur. Predictive analytics use past data to forecast future trends, and data is gathered from reports, observations, and other sources, allowing predictive technology to conduct a detailed analysis of those previous accidents and incidents, and it ultimately allows it to pinpoint patterns and show insights as to how an accident happened, why it happened, and understand the root causes of the accident, enabling companies to, have immediate remedial action or implement immediate remedial action. It also reveals trends and recurring patterns, which help predict potential outcomes and guide in companies' preventative strategies. And in a similar vein, AI is also used in predictive maintenance, which essentially uses like sensors and data analysis to anticipate equipment failures before they happen, which is obviously very, very helpful. And finally, there's automation of high-risk tasks, which I'm sure all of you are pretty aware of. So tasks such as like heavy lifting, repetitive tasks, handling hazardous material, and much more, which minimizes employee exposure to potential injury from these tasks. So those are just a few ways that AI is being used to promote workplace safety. And now I'm going to pass it to Darius to go over the current regulatory framework of AI.
Hey again, everyone. So I'm going to go over the regulatory framework for AI these days. As AI has become, integral and more embedded in business operations, employers are going to navigate this very layered regulatory framework, which is really designed to ensure that I think AI tools are used probably responsibly and fairly is the trend right now. There's three categories of laws I'm going to go through. They've got, you have these laws that are designed specifically for AI. You have existing data privacy laws and consumer protection laws that are applied to AI. And then you have your traditional employment and consumer protection laws that also, AI can be folded into and regulated underneath. These layers of regulation offer a roadmap for employers, ensuring that, the AI both enhances business processes without, compromising on a, primary level liability, but as well as like, fairness, transparency, or trust. The regulatory framework for AI is a moving target, because you can see, as we've talked about so far, AI in industries has, I think the real sort of, I don't know, novelty around AI has been driven by the, large language models and deep learning models that you've heard about in the last, 2 or 3 years. But AI itself can include topics like robotics, and even automation can be folded into it. So it's been around for longer than the last couple of years. It's just recently that the regulation has really started to, gain a bit of pace. So moving into the first type of laws, AI-specific laws. I'll overview, a few of the specific laws that have been targeted at the unique challenges posed by AI, usually in hiring and employment, but as well as that kind of consumer protection. So to start with, right, we've got the New York City Local Law and Colorado AI Act. Their focus, again, is going to be on these two things, right? Transparency and bias. They require transparency of employers letting employees know that they are using AI hiring tools, and they require bias audits, requiring that the employers also conduct these audits, indicating that the tools they're using are not, embedding any types of bias in their hiring. The idea being, again, that these AI systems are being regulated to ensure that they don't unfairly disadvantage candidates. In the second category, you've got the Illinois and Maryland Video Interviewing Acts. These states are really just focusing on mandating consent and disclosure when employers use AI in video interviews. The idea being protecting candidates' rights and enabling some sort of trust in the hiring process. And then, I talk here about the California Civil Rights Council regulations. On automated decision-making employment in the EU AI Act. The EU AI Act I mentioned mostly because a lot of sort of the regulation around AI tends to be driven, if not modeled after the EU. So I think it's important to understand. But both those, regulations, they really set these rigorous standards for the use of automated decision tools in hiring and employment. The California draft requires that companies use AI in hiring decisions. It requires that when companies are using AI in hiring decisions, they disclose its use, conduct regular bias audits, and ensure that the AI doesn't result in discriminatory outcomes. And similarly, the EU AI Act, has a categorization for AI applications by risk level, imposing a really strict requirements on high-risk applications, which it judges to be hiring tools, including, documentation, transparency, this right to making sure that human oversight is embedded in the major decisions. And again, focusing on fairness and accountability in automated hiring decisions. The accountability, making sure that employers are aware that a human does have accountability, or the company itself does have accountability for the use of AI. There is no sort of barrier between the AI and the company itself. But like I said, right, in terms of, there's over, 100 bills in the pipeline. So it's clear that states are becoming, concerned about AI's impact on privacy and fairness and wanting to become more involved. So this, like I said, is going to be like a real moving target. There will be more bills coming down the pipeline, but I think the key elements of all these are going to be a focus on, accountability, transparency, and bias prevention right now, to ensure that, AI works as an ethical tool for employers. It's possible that trend will change and sort of more principles will be embedded into the legislation, but right now, I think that's the focus. Then moving on to the next slide, there's some of the regulations that cover AI if they weren't, specifically focused on AI. And these are the laws that weren't, they're not designed specifically or more, exclusively for AI, but they do really contribute to shaping how it is responsibly used. You have the big data privacy laws, CCPA and GDPR, where they enforce these really rigorous standards on data usage, requiring organizations to be transparent and responsible with the personal data used in AI, especially when it comes to, profiling. And again, sort of the trend, automated decisions in hiring. Then we have the state biometric laws and all party consent laws. These are the laws that really require, explicit consent for AI processing or sensitive biometric data. You're thinking about facial recognition, and mandating that all participants that are informed when AI analyzes, conversations or interactions, and then making sure that they establish, clear boundaries, ensuring that the AI applications handle, personal data, I suppose, again, transparently and ethically. And then in the category of electronic monitoring laws, just one more on the last slide. These are the laws that, really require employers to, notify employees when AI tools are being used to monitor or evaluate the performance. The idea being, like Sam was talking about, tracking productivity, assessing time management, even analyzing communications. In their, those monitoring laws need to disclose what data is being collected and how it'll be used, and oftentimes that's going to mean, using AI. So again, like these laws, they're typically focused on data and privacy, but they do shape AI's use, and they really focus on this, making sure that there is consent from employees, or consumers when AI is being used to analyze, their decisions or actions. And then finally, we've got kind of the existing employment and consumer laws and how AI kind of folds into those. There's been like a pretty recent and significant push by the EEOC to apply the ADA and Title VII, making sure that, when employers use AI tools, that they comply with the anti-discrimination laws, ensuring that they don't, create barriers for people with disabilities or introduce, again, this theme, bias focused on race, gender, or other protected characteristics. The same is going to apply to the Age Discrimination Employment Act, where again, AI hiring tools can inadvertently introduce age bias. If you're selecting from a pool of candidates looking for a specific skill, an AI tool might recognize that that skill is much more prevalent in younger individuals if the tool, or if the skill is more common there, and as a result, accidentally or purposely filter out older candidates therein, creating a bias in the hiring process. And then you have, the FTC Section 5 and, the state unfair and deceptive acts regulations. Section 5 is the FTC's, regulation prohibiting unfair deceptive practices, which, the FTC can point at anything it views as unfair and deceptive. And recently that's been AI as it becomes more, again, embedded in business operations. And then finally with the FCRA, right, the Fair Credit Reporting Act, AI systems using credit checks, background screenings, or employment decisions similarly have to, align with the FCRA's requirements, ensuring data accuracy and transparency for affected individuals. So, we've talked about the specific laws that apply to AI, talked about, the sort of adjacent laws that are going to affect AI. These are, traditional laws that are being adapted to the AI era. And as a result, I think, these are underscoring that AI isn't, beyond regulatory reach of laws that came before AI became popular and really embedded in business operations. So finally, I'll go a little bit over the AI executive order, and which is, that came out, I think, about 2 years ago. Biden's AI executive order, moving on to the next slide, set these kind of comprehensive guidelines for safe and ethical AI use. It had a focus on employment standards and public health and safety, again, calling for AI oversight in hiring and workplace monitoring, focusing on health and safety through, testing again of high-risk AI systems in critical industries to make sure that, flawed or biased AI wasn't being used in applications that are going to affect health and safety. Now, this is, again, an open question as to how this executive order will be used moving forward. The administration change could impact enforcement priorities and AI priorities. So while the core safety standards might remain, I don't know, a new administration might lean towards lighter regulation, less oversight, or perhaps more, innovation incentives. So while, this focused on protecting workers and public health through specific regulatory approaches, that could kind of shift with the new administration. So this is something to watch and see kind of if there is a replacement and how it might affect employers and regulation moving forward. So with that, we can move on to the next section. And Sam, I think this is your section.
Yeah, thanks, Darius. So we'll get into we talked about earlier examples of AI in employment, and now we'll talk about some considerations or concerns that employers should have related to their use of AI in their operations. So the first, I think the main concern at this point is the disparate impact based on the ways that AI is being used, as we discussed earlier, for screening or evaluating employees' performance or performance reviews. The main concern is about having a disparate impact related to protected categories such as race, gender, age, disability. What you don't want as an employer is for the AI to serve an employment function such as evaluation or discipline, and kind of do that in a discriminatory way without you realizing it and leading to potential future lawsuits. So if we go to the next slide, there's an example of this, which is from a couple of years ago. It was iTutor Group was a company that hired remote English tutors for students in China, and the EEOC filed a complaint in New York alleging that iTutor Group intentionally discriminated against older applicants because the software that they used for hiring automatically rejected female applicants over 55 and male applicants over the age of 60. A total of almost 200 potential applicants had been screened out by the software. And this was only discovered because one applicant submitted identical applications, except for one difference, which was their birth date. And in one example, their application went through, and in another example, it had gotten screened out. The case settled. It didn't actually go to a trial, but iTutor Group agreed to pay $365,000 to the group of applicants who had been rejected. And it also had to do various compliance policy work with the EEOC as part of the settlement. So that's one example of how a disparate impact using AI can be a financial detriment to an employer. Another area of potential liability came from California this year in a case called Mobley versus Workday. In that case, an applicant was applying to multiple jobs through the Workday platform. Workday is sort of like a website where employers can post different job openings, and it kind of gathers them all together and can make suggestions to applicants on what kind of jobs they should apply to. So this applicant had applied to multiple different jobs through the Workday platform. And at that point, Workday had implemented an AI tool to conduct the initial screening of those applications. This applicant's application had been rejected by every single company that he applied to. And he sued Workday for discrimination based on, I believe it was race. And so Workday filed a motion to dismiss, and the court held that Workday was an agent because its tools are being used to perform traditional hiring functions of rejecting candidates at the screening stage. It hasn't gone to trial yet. This was just the motion to dismiss stage. And so they haven't ruled on the merits of whether Workday is liable, but they've held at this point that there's enough evidence to go forward. One of the important parts of this case is that the EEOC was involved in briefing. And so we now have an example of the EEOC being involved in Workday and in the iTutor Group settlement, which is an indication that the EEOC is taking this AI implementation extremely seriously and really trying to hold employers accountable when that AI use goes awry, for lack of a better word. So while this case held that a job board provider could be liable to applicants for discrimination, from the employer perspective, it could also mean that employers who post on these job boards could also be liable for that third party's discrimination. And so you want to be very careful if you're using platforms to post job openings for your own company, that that company is using AI or a screening method in legal ways and not using it in a potentially disparate discrimination context. Sometimes that can be hard for you as the employer to know, but you want to be aware of what kind of processes these websites are using to screen applicants for your employer. So there's also a lot of privacy considerations that employers should be aware of, specifically as it relates to communication about data collection, and Darius touched on this a little bit, but we'll go into a little bit more detail. For example, we've had a case in Illinois where there's the Biometric Information Privacy Act that regulated the collection and storage of employees' fingerprints, face scans, and eye scans. And we had a case where a trucking company had installed cameras into their trucks to monitor their drivers and ensure they're following safety protocols, such as wearing seatbelts and not using their cell phones while driving. And that software had facial recognition. The company got sued under the Illinois law for failing to disclose to its employees that the cameras contained facial recognition software. So as Darius kind of explained, because AI is in its infancy, there's not a lot of laws that regulate exactly how AI can be used, but there are a lot of laws in various states that deal with notifying employees when certain types of data is being collected. And that's a potential pitfall for all employers if they're using this type of information. And then another sort of privacy factor is how you store this type of data. generally, it probably makes sense to have AI data stored separately from HR and personnel records, just because they deal with different types of data. And there's various record keeping and notification requirements for both sets of data. And you don't want to, as an employer, be conflating different laws and having to notify or produce information that you wouldn't ordinarily have to notify or produce about, because that information is being stored together. So in terms of privacy, obviously HR files there is a level of privacy to them, but there is a lot more privacy that might apply to certain types of artificial intelligence data like fingerprints, face scans, etc. The last employer consideration is the potential use of tracking off-duty activity. So oftentimes surveillance and monitoring of employees in the employment context is perfectly legal, but if there are devices or certain types of machines that can monitor this data outside of the workplace, that could potentially implicate some liability for an employer. Currently, California is the only state that has a specific law governing employee GPS tracking. An employer must notify employees that their location is being tracked, and the law prohibits tracking that location, obviously, outside of the workplace context. And so if you are using, for example, GPS tracking for certain employees, you just want to ensure that that is only being used in the workplace context. So if, for example, your employees have the ability or option to take their vehicles home after work, there needs to be some sort of mechanism for turning off any GPS tracking at that point. And then the last point is just that location tracking could violate the NLRA, which is the National Labor Relations Act, if it occurs while employees are engaged in union-related activity or protected activities. And so you just want to be aware, if you are tracking employees in any way, that that's not being done in violation of the NLRA. So with that, I'll turn it over to Andrea and Rachel to talk about considerations for employers in OSHA.
Thanks, Sam. So yeah, now we're going to go over some key OSHA considerations for employers when implementing AI technologies in the workplace. So OSHA has specific record keeping and access requirements when it comes to what it defines as employee exposure or medical records under its access to employee exposure and medical record standard. There's typically a massive amount of data collected when monitoring workplaces and employees, some of which may fall under this definition of employee exposure records or employee medical records. And just as a reminder, for purposes applicable to this webinar, an employee exposure record is a record containing environmental monitoring or measuring of a toxic substance or harmful physical agent, or biological monitoring results, which directly assess the absorption of a toxic substance or harmful physical agent by body systems. And a medical record includes all biological monitoring records not defined as employee exposure records. But these would need to be made and maintained by a physician or other healthcare personnel. And so, sorry, yes. So, unless there is an exception or another standard applies, employers must provide employees or designated representatives access to such records within 15 days of a request, and preserve and maintain employee medical records for at least the duration of employment plus 30 years, employee exposure records for at least 30 years, and analysis of employee or exposure records for at least 30 years. So that's just something to be aware of. And I'm going to pass it to Rachel to go over some of the other OSHA considerations.
Thanks, Andrea. So a couple other things to note about when you're using AI in the workplace, and to keep in mind that doesn't, we need to be mindful that other OSHA, traditional OSHA obligations or doctrine still potentially applies. And, we see this sometimes with joint liability or secondary employees and the multi-employer worksite and those considerations. So, I have seen situations where, using devices to monitor or surveil, your workers may also take into account other workers that might be at your work site as well. So companies may monitor or survey workers that are not their employees, whether on purpose or as part of. I've seen situations where AI is used to help monitor employees' work practices, and then it may pick up other employees on the site that it may not intend to, or it just, or it may intend to. But just to keep in mind that it's not always so easy to differentiate between your employees and other employees on the site. So this may trigger joint employer issues, as we think of it in, more traditionally in the employment realm, or, secondary employer issues, or multi-employer issues that we see, impact in the OSHA realm. So things to think about if you are employing AI as part of reviewing safety or monitoring safety in your workplace. Who and what should be monitored, and what are you surveilling? Is there an issue with the contractors, workers? What do you do with that information if you happen to pick up on other employers' information? So if you're surveying and it picks up a contractor's employee doing something that is unsafe, what then becomes your obligations? And then who becomes responsible for correcting that hazard? And some other kind of interesting things that I have also seen come up is AI and workplace violence and harassment. So depending on how the form of the AI could potentially, engage in workplace violence, threats, or harassment. So AI is increasingly used to replace humans in workplace interactions, and increasing that communication between AI and your workers. So regulations generally do not consider AI when discussing workplace violence, threats, or harassment, but the AI can generate human-like communications, even though it may lack understanding or intent. So it may use language that employees consider threatening or harassing. AI may make communications to employers that is a potential threat. So what do you do when you have an employee that reports, the AI said X to me, or I've had this communication with the AI. So you want to ensure employees that are engaging with AI are familiar with company policies around harassment or workplace violence threats. And this, if you are a part of training AI language models, taking that into account, and ensure employees are reporting any issues that they have with AI. Again, does a communication that is a threat or potential harassment from AI, quote unquote, count as a threat or harassment? Who really knows at this point, but it's certainly something that could be considered as violating, requirements to maintain a safe and helpful workplace if an employee is exposed to that type of language. And then lastly, I'll say is that, of course, AI is not 100% accurate. Like most things, humans aren't 100% accurate either. And so when you rely on it, you need to keep that and bear that in mind. Human oversight is going to be essential depending on how you use the AI. So when using AI to draft policies or other critical documents, it's crucial that humans carefully review and fact check that output. If the AI is used to monitor the workplace or employees, any logs it creates should be regularly reviewed for accuracy, especially when submitted to OSHA, because that would be subject to increased scrutiny potentially, and is currently unclear how OSHA would interpret and evaluate automated reports like that. And, I've certainly seen the use of AI maybe to be a starting point for an SOP, for example. But then, of course, you're going to want that human element to be overseeing and reviewing anything that might be a potential starting place with the AI. That's going to not be your final product. It's going to have to be reviewed for accuracy.
So in closing out, I'm just going to go through a few kind of tips we thought about that might be useful for you to consider if you are, using AI currently and or considering using it to develop kind of an AI strategy that can guide how you use it. So to start with, tip number one, thinking about like what is, how are you going to use it? We can move to the next slide. Kind of deciding what is, what's the point of using AI at your company? Is it going to be useful as a central part of your organization? Is it going to be useful, just for certain departments? We've talked a lot about sort of the human resources and workplace and safety areas where AI can be used. Is it helpful? If you think about AI, right? Going back to that very first kind of what is AI? If analysis is an essential part of your business, is an essential part of output you're trying to create. If there isn't lots of data to analyze, then the AI itself might not even be useful. On the other side, if you have performance data for lots of employees that might be organized in a really systematic way, or companies, you have a deep data of, portfolios of information on inventory, raw ingredients, then those kind of businesses are where they're going to have where you might have the biggest opportunity to use machine learning to gain these granular insights that maybe a human looking over the data might not get to. So consider also on the same, on the other side of that, is there a no-go use for generative AI? Is there information that, you don't want AI to touch, you don't want it to analyze? Is it even necessary, like I was saying? So just be conscientious as a first step of, it's a really, really incredible tool that can be used in so many areas, but the central piece is always going to be its ability to analyze data. And if that isn't something that you need, then the AI might be causing you a little bit more harm than good. So the first one is just be conscientious, decide how you're going to use it, whether you want to use it, and what parts of your organization it might be most helpful to. So we can move on to the next slide. A lot of times when companies use AI, one way, because it is again like kind of the theme, this sort of moving target. One of the ways that some companies have guided how they've used AI is this idea of using, principles, right? This is how it started, from kind of in its infancy, and like, as AI has really accelerated, how machine learning and deep learning have become these more popular topics. One of the ways that organizations and countries have sought to guide how it's been used are creating company AI principles. For instance, consider establishing these set of tools that can kind of guide an ethical use of generative AI within the company, making sure that, and the second part of this is so important, really ensuring that employees or management are trained on the appropriate use of AI in the workplace and are well aware of the tools. Examples are aware of the principles, main, central principles that you'll have heard through this presentation are, fairness, accountability, respect for privacy, aligns with the corporate mission, values, and goals. I think, it's being socially beneficial, being aware of unfair bias. Key to this is really just making sure that the AI is tested. If you're, using AI without testing it, then that's going to obviously cause problems. And making sure, certainly when you start using it, that it's really accountable to people, right? Making sure that, you're not using AI blindly. You're making sure that there is human insight being embedded in the areas where AI is being used, so you have as much control over it as you want and need, because as you heard through this presentation, there's a lot of ways it can come up. There's a lot of ways you might already be using it, and making sure you're aware of those is really, really important, and a good way of applying those principles to the areas that it's being used in your company. So we move to the next slide. Being careful when you use sensitive data is just so important, right? If your company has confidential information, client information, trade secrets, posting information into some sort of like generative AI chatbot could, one, on a legal basis, violate your contractual obligations. It could expose trade secrets. It could, allow them to be disclosed to the public. It could affect your business model there. And in terms of being careful with utilizing sensitive data, the second line of this is so important. It's, again, this training piece. You have to make sure that your employees are aware of the risks of sharing confidential information with AI tools. And like I was talking about in the first step, right? Thinking about how you want to use AI, setting the boundaries for where it will be used. If AI shouldn't be used in, the department that's dealing with the secret sauce, then make sure that all the employees are trained on not using AI, making sure that your secret information isn't being pushed into some sort of generative AI that could use it to learn, could use it to and create something else based on information that is essential to your company. We can move on to the next slide. And don't forget about quality control. We've talked a lot about how AI is used and its power, but it's not perfect, and it's known for producing like erroneous outputs. A company's acceptable use policy or guidance should make sure that employees review any output generated for accuracy and correctness. Using AI can't be an excuse for putting out bad work, right? On a basic level, it has to be reviewed. It has to be up to your company's standards. And just because it's produced by AI and there is, this mysterious artificial intelligence that's, using powerful analysis doesn't mean it won't make mistakes. It's known to, and you'll ultimately be susceptible if you use AI and come up with products that are below quality or quality that you don't think is good enough. So, yeah, and again, like it's always going to be tied back to you. So we can move on to the next slide. Preserving authenticity and avoiding misrepresentation. This is kind of running along the same tracks of the last slide. If you claim or imply that the output that you are using, that you're creating is human generated, and it's not, it's obviously so importantly going to lead to customer mistrust. Depending on the use, it could result in public relations issues, and it could result in consumer protection claims. So transparency is so key when using AI tools. When I was going through the regulatory framework, one of the principles that is really a lot of the legislation focused on AI really harps upon is transparency. Social media is notorious for calling out content that was created using generative AI, but customers value it, value authenticity, and revealing the use of generative AI is not necessarily, it's not only like ethical, but could be appreciated the audience, showing that you're using technology effectively, but failing to use it, it would be a severe misstep and potentially could have legal implications. So making sure you're being authentic and being transparent when using AI tools is vital. We can move on to the next slide. And again, all of the principles, all of the guidelines, all of the regulations are only good as your ability to conduct AI training and provide employees notice. So providing periodic training is a really smart way to manage, the legal, commercial, and reputational risks of using AI at work. You might consider educating HR staff on all the components of any AI tool that's being used. Again, reiterate what uses of AI are generally acceptable and what uses require prior authorization from a designated authority. From the privacy side, provide employees notice if they're going to be monitored or surveilled in any way, because if AI is being used to analyze that information. And again, it's important that one thing I will certainly highlight here is that periodic training is really important because AI tools are being rolled out so frequently, and they do change year by year because it's such a fast-moving area. It's really important that the training is periodic and your employees are aware. So, for all of this, for all the tips we're providing, I think this is one of the most important ones, because if your employees aren't trained, you're still going to be liable for their missteps if they, for instance, post sensitive information into an AI tool when they're not supposed to, or accidentally claim information or claim work that they're producing is their own when it is AI and incorrect. And then finally, I think we can move on to the last slide. And that's, take time to carefully draft a comprehensive AI policy. If you're using AI, if it's effective, it's helpful to your business model, being conscientious and thoughtful about how you use the AI and put it down on writing in a policy is a great way to make sure that your company is, moving forward, being sensible about using AI. So again, establish AI uses and risks, establishes where there are no-go zones, where it is, not permissible at all to use AI. Make sure there's some sort of accountability and governance within your organization where you're using AI. For instance, do you want to, appoint one individual on your staff to be in charge of AI? Make sure that they're testing all AI tools. They're in charge of making sure that they're not producing any bias. Encourage continuous monitoring and evaluation. Make sure that you're up to date on your AI tools. Are they, have they been, are they up to date? Communicate the AI policy, as I've said, and make sure you're training your employees on the policy. And again, explain the legal compliance risks, explain where there are issues. The legislation is fast moving. It can be applied in different ways. We've got the specific AI laws. We've got the traditional labor and employment laws and workplace and safety and health laws that can be applied to AI. But explaining those legal compliance risks is a good way of making sure that your organization stays compliant and your employees are aware of where they could cause missteps. So with that, I think we can probably close it out, and we'll leave it open for a little bit. If anybody has any questions about this, we'll stay on for a few minutes. But thanks so much for your time today. Really, really interesting topic, and would love to hear from any questions if you guys have any.
If anybody has, additional questions that they want to send to any of the panelists, feel free to do so. Here's our contact information. The slides and the recording will be sent around after this as well. So if, as you're reviewing, additional things come up, feel free to reach out. We do have the last of our 2024 webinars for December, so check our schedule for that. Subscribe to our blogs, and also look out, we'll be releasing our schedules for the 2025 webinar series in the next month or so. So make sure that you register and sign up for those as well. Thanks so much.